Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm reading from the Bible and the Psyche, Individuation, Symbolism in the Old Testament by Edward F. Edinger. Now, keep in mind that from a psychological point of view and the point of view of a psychiatrist, both Dr. Edinger and Dr. Jung were psychiatrists, medical doctors who deal with mental health issues. The Bible is a series of stories that teach us how to live, and also they assist us in the transformation of our psyches over time, because the experiences of the biblical people are our experiences, their everyday experiences right now in the 21st century. And all of the religions of the world, all of their sacred texts do the same thing, which is to support your mental health. And they contain a lot more depth and a lot more subtlety than can be just learned out of a book. And that's why they work, why the rituals work. And so before I begin today's reading, I'll just read again this quote from Dr. Jung, volume 10 of the collected works, called, and this is from paragraph 367 of the state of psychotherapy today. Here's what he said. For thousands of years, the mind of man has worried about the sick soul, perhaps even earlier than it did about the sick body. The propitiation of gods and the perils of the soul and its salvation, these are not yesterday's problems. Religions are psychotherapeutic systems in the truest sense of the word and on the grandest scale. They express the whole range of the psychic problem in mighty images. They are the avowal and recognition of the soul, and at the same time, the revelation of the soul's nature. From this universal foundation, no human soul is cut off. Only the individual consciousness that has lost its connection with the psychic totality remains caught in the illusion that the soul is a small, circumscribed area, a fit subject for scientific theorizing. The loss of this great relationship is the prime evil of neurosis. And so Dr. Jung summed it up better than I can. And so yesterday we read about the chosen people in chapter 12. And so today I'm reading from the Bible and the Psyche, Individuation, Symbolism in the Old Testament by Edward F. Edinger. This segment of chapter 12 is entitled The Babylonian Captivity. The Bible and history make clear that to be chosen by Yahweh, I guess I don't need this headset. That makes me happy. Okay, I'll start over. Sorry about that. The Babylonian Captivity. The Bible and history make clear that to be chosen by Yahweh is a very dubious distinction. Rivka Kluger addresses the question, why did Yahweh choose Israel? Quote, it was a poor peasant people eternally oppressed by the surrounding great kingdoms, Egypt and Babylon. It could make room for itself only inwardly and was thereby peculiarly suited to take upon itself the misery and dignity, the curse and blessing of God's election. It was, so to speak, God's easiest prey. The grave ambiguity of being God's elect is demonstrated in the downfall of Israel and Judah and the Babylonian exile. In response to their infidelities, Yahweh reacts to the chosen people with the rage of a jealous husband. The northern kingdom of Israel fell to the invading Assyrians in 721 BC, and its population was deported. In 598 and 587 in 598 and 587, Jerusalem fell to Babylon, followed by deportations to Babylon. These disasters were specifically attributed to Yahweh's wrath at the worship of Baal and Astarte. Quote, since Manasseh, king of Judah, has done these shameful deeds, acting more wickedly than all the Amorites did before him, and has led Judah itself into sin with his idols, Yahweh, the God of Israel, says this, quote, look, I will bring such disaster as to make the ears of all who hear of it tingle. I will stretch over Jerusalem the same measuring line as over Samaria, the same plumb rule as for the house of Ahab. I will scour Jerusalem as a man scours a dish, and having scoured it, turns it upside down. I will cast away the remnant of my inheritance, delivering them into the power of their enemies, and making them serve as prey and booty to all their enemies, because they have done what is displeasing to me and have provoked my anger from the day their ancestors came out of Egypt until now. 2 Kings 21, 11 through 15. This terrible passage describes the ghastly consequences of being God's chosen one, his vessel or dish. It represents the stark and brutal reality of one aspect of individuation. Once a conscious connection with the self has been made, the covenant or choosing, one has very little margin for error. The ego is now committed to being a vessel of The ego is now committed to being a vessel to contain transpersonal meaning. If it shirks its task, it will be scoured. The disaster, now keep in mind, this is a psychiatrist that's writing this. The disaster struck. Jerusalem fell to the attacking Babylonians. King Zedekiah was captured, and he was confronted with the awful image of utter defeat. The king of Babylon passed sentence on Zedekiah at Riblah. Quote, he had the sons of Zedekiah slaughtered before his eyes, then put out Zedekiah's eyes, and loading him with chains, carried him off to Babylon. 2 Kings 24:7. As it happened to her king, so it happened to all of Judah, and she was carried off to 70 years of Babylonian captivity. Babylonian captivity represents the mortificatio, that's an alchemical term. Babylonian captivity represents the mortificatio phase of Israel's sacred history. Like the prima materia of the alchemists, the Israelites are subjected to torturous operations to bring about their transformation. Elsewhere, Yahweh says, quote, I have put you in the fire like silver. I have tested you in the furnace of distress. Isaiah 46:10. The symbolism of the Babylonian captivity refers not only to mortificatio, but also to coagulatio. Von Franz tells us, quote, the captivity is an important concept in the Turba, and there it symbolizes the intentional fixing, solidifying of a volatile spirit or soul for the purpose of transformation. The soul is held fast like a slave, so that she cannot flee, and she falleth into sickness and rut and rust and perisheth. But because she fleeth not, she is made free and gaineth her spouse. The fixing is called katoche, imprisonment in Greek alchemy. Unquote. Chapter 8 of the alchemical treatise Aurora Consurgens is entitled, quote, of the gate of brass and bar of iron of the Babylonish captivity, unquote. This text, with elaborate biblical amplifications, equates the Israelites' rescue from the Babylonian captivity with the alchemical solutio. Quote, God hath anointed me with the oil of gladness, that there may dwell in me the virtue of penetration and of liquefaction in the day of my resurrection, when I shall be glorified by God. For this generation cometh and passes away, until he come that is to be sent, who also taketh away the yoke of our captivity, wherein we sate 70 years by the rivers of Babylon. Unquote. The image of Babylon appears in Revelation 17, 3-6. Quote, I saw a woman riding a scarlet beast, which had 7 heads and 10 horns, and had blasphemous titles written all over it. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, and glittered with gold and jewels and pearls, and she was holding a gold wine cup filled with the disgusting filth of her fornication. On her forehead was written a name, a cryptic name, Babylon the Great, the mother of all the prostitutes and all the filthy practices on the earth. I saw that she was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Unquote. The immediate reference is to Rome, but she is presented as a manifestation of the archetype Babylon. The symbolism of Babylon is very similar to that of Egypt, signifying secular, fleshly existence oblivious to God. Psychologically, it represents secular egohood, living unconsciously at the expense of transpersonal energies, drunk with blood of the saints. Although at one phase of development, the captivity of Egypt or Babylon is a necessary coagulatio, at a later phase it becomes bestial and blasphemous. The gold cup and its contents is a negative version of the Holy Grail, but its presence, together with the gold, jewels, and pearls, indicates that the supreme value of the psyche is being manifest. The archetypal image of Babylon appears historically in the description of the period from 1309 to 1377, when the papacy was moved from Rome to Avignon, France. This period was called the Babylonian Captivity of the papacy. Petrarch describes the Avignon of the popes as, quote, the impious Babylon, the hell on earth, the soul of vice, the sewer of the world. There is in it neither faith nor charity or religion nor the fear of God. All the filth and wickedness of the world have run together here. Old men plunge headlong into the arms of Venus, forgetting their age, dignity, and powers. They rush into every shame, as if all their glory consisted not in the cross of Christ, but in feasting, drunkenness, and unchastity. Fornication, incest, rape, adultery are the lascivious delights of the pontifical games, unquote. That's from Cambridge Medieval History, Volume 7, page 288. What Petrarch describes so negatively, psychologically considered, is a necessary step in the development of the collective Western psyche. It is a return of the repressed for the purpose of assimilation. Okay, so that's the end of the Babylonian Captivity part. The next part is entitled The Return. As predicted by Jeremiah, Judah and Jerusalem were turned into a formless waste, tohu wa bohu, Jeremiah 4:23. Quote, yes, thus speaks Yahweh, the whole land shall be laid waste. I will make an end of it once for all, at which the earth will go into mourning, and the heavens above grow dark. For I have spoken, and I will not change my mind. I have decided and will not go back on it. Jeremiah 4:27 and 28. The nation was plunged into the mortificatio of exile, expressed so poignantly in Lamentations. Zion has been widowed. The princess is now a vassal. Quote, she passes her nights weeping. The tears run down her cheeks. Not one of all her lovers remains to comfort her. Her friends have all betrayed her and become her enemies. Lamentations 1:2. But the same prophet who announced the destruction of Israel is also prophesied. But the same prophet who announced the destruction of Israel also prophesied its restoration. Quote, but look, I will hasten their recovery and their cure. I will cure them and let them know peace and security in full measure. I will restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem and build them again as they were before. Jeremiah 33:6-7. The great 31st chapter of Jeremiah announces the reconciliation which is to come between Israel and Yahweh. Quote, Yahweh says this, they have found pardon in the wilderness. Those who have survived the sword, Yahweh has appeared to him from afar. I have loved you with an everlasting love, so I am constant in my affection of you. I build you once more, you shall be rebuilt. Virgin of Israel, adorned once more and with your tambourines. Let me read that correctly. I build you once more, you shall be rebuilt, Virgin of Israel. Adorned once more and with your tambourines, you will go out dancing gaily. You will plant vineyards once more on the mountains of Samaria. The planters have done their planting. They will gather their fruit. Yes, a day will come when the watchmen shout on the mountains of Ephraim, up, let us go up to Zion, to Yahweh our God. For Yahweh says this, shout with joy for Jacob. Hail the chief of nations, proclaim, praise, shout. Yahweh has saved his people, the remnant of Israel. See, I will bring them back from the land of the north and gather them from the far ends of earth, all of them, the blind and the lame, women with child, women in labor, a great company returning here. They had left in tears. I will comfort them as I lead them back. I will guide them to streams of water by a smooth path where they will not stumble. For I am father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn son. Jeremiah 31, 2 through 9. Ephraim replies in Jeremiah 31, 18, quote, "You have disciplined me. I accepted the discipline like a young bull untamed. Bring me back, let me come back, for you are Yahweh my God. Yes, I turned away, but have since repented." Unquote. This reference to the disciplining of a young bull reminds us of the yoke symbolism used in chapter 27. Jeremiah is there told to make yourself ropes and a yoke and put them on your neck, verse 2. The message in this symbolic action is that all must bow their necks to the yoke of Nebuchadnezzar, whom Yahweh speaks of as my servant. Jeremiah 27, 7. Otherwise, they will be banished from the soil. Because Israel would not submit to a willing yoke, she was subjected to the harsher yoke of exile. The theme of taming the young bull occurs in the I Ching, hexagram 26, the taming power of the great. Unquote. The commentary speaks of gelding a boar or fastening a headboard to the horns of a young bull. These images are applied to the strengthening of character. Quote, "The superior man acquaints himself with many sayings of antiquity and many deeds of the past in order to strengthen his character thereby. In the words and deeds of the past there lies hidden a treasure that men may use to strengthen and elevate their own characters. The way to study the past is not to confine oneself to a mere knowledge of history, but through application of this knowledge to give actuality to the past." Unquote. The Babylonian captivity can be seen as a taming or cultivating process where primitive psychic energies are domesticated. The willful arrogance of the young ego, bull, is yoked to the service of transpersonal purpose. Once Israel had accepted the exile as the yoke of Yahweh, she found pardon in the wilderness. As Yahweh says, "On that day I will break the yoke on their necks and snap their chains. They will be no longer the servants of aliens, but will serve Yahweh, their God." Jeremiah 30, 8 and 9. In other words, servitude to man is replaced by servitude to God. Psychologically, this means that the ego accepts its limitations as coming from the self. This generates a religious attitude which no longer kicks against the goad. In the words of Emerson, quote, "We should not postpone and refer and wish, but do broad justice where we are, by whomsoever we deal with, accepting our actual companions and circumstances, however humble or odious, as the mystic officials to whom the universe was delegated its whole pleasure for us." Unquote. Just as bondage in Egypt and the wandering in the wilderness was followed by Yahweh's covenant with Israel at Mount Sinai, so the bondage and exile in Babylon is followed by a new covenant announced by Jeremiah. Quote, "See, the days are coming, it is Yahweh who speaks, when I will make new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, but not a covenant like the one I made with their ancestors on the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. They broke that covenant of mine, so I had to show them who was master. It is Yahweh who speaks. No, this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel when those days arrive. It is Yahweh who speaks. Deep within them, I will plant my law, writing it on their hearts. Then I will be their God, and they shall be my people. There will be no further need for neighbor to try to teach neighbor, or brother to say to brother, quote, learn to know Yahweh, unquote. No, they will all know me, the least no less than the greatest. It is Yahweh who speaks, since I will forgive their iniquity and never call their sin to mind. Jeremiah 31, 31 to 34. An important feature of the new covenant is that Yahweh's relation to man will be individualized. In those days, people will no longer say, quote, the fathers have eaten unripe grapes. The children's teeth are set on edge, unquote. But each is to die for his own sin. Every man who eats unripe grapes is to have his own teeth set on edge. Jeremiah 31, 29 and 30. The announcement that Yahweh's law will be written on their hearts means nothing less than the recognition of the psychic reality of religious and metaphysical images. Let me just see how long this next section is. Okay, I will read Ezekiel's vision, the next part of this chapter. I'm in chapter 12, and I'm reading this book, The Bible and the Psyche, Individuation, Symbolism in the Old Testament by Edward F. Edinger. And I'm in chapter 12, page 124, Ezekiel's vision. It was during the Babylonian Captivity, the nadir of Israel's existence, according to the Old Testament records, that Ezekiel's magnificent vision occurred. Quote, I looked, a stormy wind blew from the north, a great cloud with light around it, a fire from which flashes of lightning darted, and in the center a sheen like bronze at the heart of the fire. In the center I saw what seemed four animals. They looked like this. They were of human form, each had four faces, each had four wings. Their legs were straight. They had hooves like oxen, glittering like polished brass. Human hands showed under their wings, and the faces of all four were turned to the four quarters. Their wings were spread upwards. Each had two wings that touched, and two wings that covered his body, and they all went straight forward. They went where the Spirit urged them. They did not turn as they moved. Between these animals, something could be seen like flaming brands or torches. Darting between the animals, the fire flashed light and lightning streaked from the fire, and the creatures ran to and fro like thunderbolts. I looked at the animals. There was a wheel on the ground by each of them, one beside each of the four. The wheels glittered as if made of chrysolite. All four looked alike and seemed to be made one inside the other. They went forward four ways and kept their course unswervingly. Their rims seemed enormous when I looked at them, and all four rims had eyes all the way around. When the animals went forward, the wheels went forward beside them. And when the animals left the ground, the wheels too left the ground. Where the Spirit urged them, there the wheels went, since the spirit of the animal was in the wheels. Over the heads of the animals, a sort of vault. gleaming like crystal, arched above their heads. Under this vault, their wings stretched out to one another, and each had two covering his body. I heard the noise of their wings as they moved. It sounded like rushing water, like the voice of Shaddai, a noise like a storm, like the noise of a camp. When they halted, they folded their wings, and there was a noise. Above the vault, over their heads, was something that looked like a sapphire. It was shaped like a throne, and high up on this throne was a being that looked like a man. I saw him shine like bronze, and close to and all around him from what seemed his loins upward, I saw that what looked like fire, a light all round like a bow in the clouds on rainy days. That is how the surrounding light appeared. It was something that looked like the glory of Yahweh. I looked and prostrated myself, and I heard a voice speaking. Ezekiel 1 4 through 28. Now my customary hypnosis is getting me. This great vision, writes Jung, is made up of two well-ordered compound quaternities, that is, conceptions of totality, such as we frequently observe today as spontaneous phenomena. It is the culmination of the Old Testament considered as a psychological document. Just as the numinous mandala image of the self often expresses the consummation of an individual analysis, so this vision of Ezekiel completes the collective process of individuation of which the Old Testament is a record. The vision has played a central role in the psychological development of the Western psyche. The four animals of the vision were taken over by Christian iconography. Okay, start that over. The four animals of the vision were taken over by Christian iconography to represent the four evangelists who appear in Christian mandalas as the four pillars of the throne of Christ. It was the central image in early Jewish mysticism, so-called Merkabah, or throne mysticism. Sholem writes, quote, "The earliest Jewish mysticism is throne mysticism. Its essence is not absorbed contemplation of God's true nature, but perception of his appearance on the throne, as described by Ezekiel, and cognition of the mysteries of the celestial throne world. God's pre-existing throne, which embodies and exemplifies all forms of creation, is at once the goal and the theme of his mystic vision." Unquote. Ezekiel's vision was also important in the speculations of the Kabbalists, and finally was brought into connection with the modern mind when Jung used it as a model for his most differentiated formula of the self. Jung emphasizes the fact that the figure on the throne is a being that looked like a man. Here Ezekiel has seen the essential content of the unconscious, namely the idea of the higher man by whom Yahweh was morally defeated. In his encounter with Job, and who was later to become. Let me read that sentence. Okay, so here Ezekiel has seen the essential content of the unconscious, namely the idea of the higher man, by whom Yahweh was morally defeated in in his encounter with Job, and who he was later to become. And Jung continues, quote, Ezekiel grasped in a symbol the fact that Yahweh was drawing closer to men. This is something which came to Job as an experience, but probably did not reach his consciousness. That is to say, he did not realize that his consciousness was higher than Yahweh's, and that consequently God wants to become man. What is more, in Ezekiel, we might for the first time we may meet for the first time the title Son of Man, which Yahweh significantly uses in addressing the prophet, presumably to indicate that he is the son of the man on the throne, and hence a prefiguration of the much later revelation in Christ. In a letter, Jung elaborates further the development of the Son of Man image. He writes, quote, the immediate source and origin of the myth projected upon the teacher Jesus is to be found in the then popular Book of Enoch and its central figure of the Son of Man and his messianic mission. From the gospel texts, it is even manifest that Jesus identified himself with this Son of Man. Thus it is that the spirit of his time, the collective hope and expectation, which caused this astounding transformation, and not at all the more or less insignificant story of the man Jesus. The true agents in this true agents is the archetypal image of the God-man appearing in Ezekiel's vision for the first time in Jewish history, but in itself a considerably older figure in Egyptian theology, that is, Osiris and Horus. Ezekiel 1:26. And finally, he summarizes the essence of Ezekiel's vision in these words, quote, the encounter with the creature changes the creator. The two main climaxes are formed firstly by the Job tragedy, and secondly by Ezekiel's revelation. Job is the innocent sufferer, but Ezekiel witnesses the humanization and differentiation of Yahweh. But by being addressed as Son of Man, it is intimated to him that Yahweh's incarnation and quaternity are, so to speak, the pleromatic model for what is going to happen through the transformation and humanization of God, not only to God's Son, is foreseen from all eternity, but to man as such, unquote. Okay, a little bit more. Jung's linking of Job's experience with Ezekiel's vision draws out attention to the parallel between Job's ordeal and Israel's collective ordeal in the Babylonian exile. By enduring the wrath of Yahweh during the catastrophic events of defeat and captivity, and by diligently seeking the meaning of these events through the vision of her prophets, Israel is granted a supreme revelation of the ground plan of the Psyche through Ezekiel's vision, and thereby contributes to the humanization and transformation of God. The redemption of the nation, which is presaged by Jeremiah and Ezekiel, is realized by Cyrus, whom Yahweh calls my shepherd, Isaiah 44:28, and my anointed, Isaiah 45:1. The captives are free and instructed to go up to Jerusalem in Judah to build the temple of Yahweh. Ezra 1:3. In due time, the temple was rebuilt, and this was followed by the restitution of the community and the rebuilding of the walls in Jerusalem through the efforts of Ezra and Nehemiah. The reborn community and restored temple can be seen as symbolic expressions of Jeremiah's new covenant and Ezekiel's revelation of the new humanized Yahweh, which culminate in the Old Testament. Thus, the Hebrew scriptures, according to the Jewish arrangement, end with the book of Chronicles, whose final verse reads, quote, "Thus speaks Cyrus, king of Persia, Yahweh, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. He has ordered me to build him a temple in Jerusalem, in Judah. Whoever there is among you of all his people, may his God be with him. Let him go up." 2 Chronicles 36:23. Okay. So you see what's going on here is that the minds of the Israelites are very slowly working and refining their story over and over and over again. And so you see the images of the four evangelists on all the cathedrals of Europe, for example. Okay, so the next one is going to be controversial, and it's high time we had it. Are you ready for this? This will be tomorrow, and it's chapter 13. It's entitled Emergence of the Feminine. And so I just tantalize you for that and look forward to seeing you tomorrow when I will read it. As you see, my voice is struggling. Let me look at what you said. David says, "If I ask here some questions, will you answer them?" Yes, I will. If I'm still online, so please get going. Oleg says, "Babylon is a very interesting place and important for Jewish history. Most Jewish mythology and knowledge about God and divine experience comes from Babylon." Question: Once somebody asked to Jung, "What is answer to Job?" he answered, "The pleroma must become conscious in man." But what is pleroma? What does that mean? Well, pleroma means the ground reality. It means everything. Okay, so there was an original, it's just the original chaos, or think of it as maybe the universe before there was any life. And, and from that came life. And it gradually divided its psyche and was aware of its life force, let's say, and I'm talking about things that were going on between single-celled organisms 3.5 billion years ago, and then it divided and divided. So when we talk about duality in Jungian psychology, we're talking about how everything divided, and so an example is the Reformation, when the church was divided between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. And so that's a thesis and an antithesis, and ultimately there will be a synthesis where the understanding of the Bible in biblical times will be understood by everybody. That has not happened yet, as you might guess, and it has to be a collective dream. It has to be from all of us. I hope that's helpful. There is another book. Let's see. Let me just see if I can find something. Hold on just a second. I'm looking at the Ion Lectures by Edward Edinger, exploring the self in Jung's Ion. And I think there's a description of the pleroma here. Okay, it sort of does it in slightly different words, but here's what Edinger says in the Ion Lectures. This idea of the ion is picked up in Gnosis, in which the initial boundless deity emanates from himself a series of 30 ions. The Gnostic emanation of the ions is another amplification or elaboration of this rich, complex psychic organism that Jung writes about. Hans Jonas describes the role of the term ion in Gnosticism. Quote, in invisible and nameless heights, there was a perfect eon pre-existent. His name is Forebeginning, Forefather, and Abyss. This is the original primordial deity named Ion. No thing can comprehend him. Through immeasurable eternities, he remained in profoundest repose. With him was thought, also called grace and silence. And once this abyss took thought to project out of himself the beginning of all things, and he sank this project like a seed into the womb of the silence that was with him, and she conceived and brought forth the mind, nous, male, who is like and equal to his begetter, and alone comprehends the greatness of the Father. He is also called only begotten, Father, and beginning of all beginnings. Together with him, truth, aletheia, female, was produced, and this is the first tetrad, abyss and silence, then mind and truth. This first tetrad is a pair of two syzygies. Syzygy means pair. Further, ions were generated out of this second pair. From them came forth man and church, which is again a male-female pair, and word and life. This then gave a total of 4 syzygies, and that was called the Ogdod, the first 8. These eons produced to the glory of the Father wished to glorify the Father by their own creations and produced further emanations. From word and life issued 10 additional eons. From man and church, 12, so that out of 8 and 10 and 12 is constituted 30 eons in 15 pairs, and that totality was called the pleroma. This basic image was something quite fundamental to Jung. He used some of this terminology, such as the word pleroma. The second chapter of Ion is called the syzygy. One is not apt to know what that means unless one is familiar with this grand Gnostic conception of the origin of things. So there's your answer. I found it. Amazing. I can put my hand right on it. And just for your information, in the advanced reading group, we have done 32 seminars on Ion. And all of those are available to Advanced Reading Group members. And they are on Dropbox, and they're held privately, except for members of the Advanced Reading Group. They are not on YouTube. But I did read some of Ion and some of Edinger's book on Ion in the YouTube channel, I think up through about paragraph 100. So at least that much you could find for free in the YouTube channel. Oleg had said, what is pleroma? Okay, I read that answer, and it is unconscious. And yes, it's certainly unconscious. It emerges before life itself. Oleg says the pleroma must become conscious in man. What does that mean? Well, it actually became conscious at a lower degree, a primitive level, in all living creatures. But in order to be fully conscious, you have to understand all the consequences of being a man. That's what maturity and individuation are about. And so that's what your life is about, whether you know it or not. Oleg says that. And one other thing I would say about that, what Dr. Jung did was define how the mind actually works, how the psyche actually works. And that's what the Red Book is about. Here's the Red Book. And this is Dr. Jung's direct experience, his own direct experience with the unconscious. And he called it his confrontation with the unconscious. But many of us have had this experience, like Dr. Jung. I had my experience in 1993, about 16 years before the Red Book was published. And I had it without benefit of being a psychiatrist in my own right. So I had to get through it on my own. But I managed. I did it, and the way I did it was I wrote a novel as it was happening, and that saved me, I guess, is what I would say. Oleg says the pleroma must become conscious in man. What does that mean? Well, it means what I read just now. James Sizemore. Valentius had an interesting contribution to the pleroma. Canoma equals chaos. Well, yeah, it's chaos. And pleroma is the first cause, king of kings, monad, Godhead. Yes, okay. And so by monad, we mean before there's any discernment whatsoever. Everything is one. But once there's a discernment, once there's a split, once somebody says, aha, it's this and not this, just as Luther said, the Pope is selling get out of jail free cards. That's not good. That was discernment. Okay, so that's the kind of discernment we're talking about. And so at the beginning, at the real beginning, not in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, but at the real beginning, there was everything and there was nothing. The opposite side of the everything coin is nothing. And then there was discernment, then there was a split. That's what logos is. Rationality is dividing things into pairs so that you can examine them, thesis and antithesis. And then you decide, okay, I've got this duality now, but they're always at odds with one another. They're always the opposite sides of the same coin, but you can never get over to the other side of the coin. So what do? You create a symbol, and that then becomes a new one. And then some disobedient kid or some um, irrelevant wise man comes along and says, well, it's this and not this. It's like I just now read, before I began this reading, about the Christian pastor in Virginia who was saying, oh, this coronavirus thing, that's total baloney. It's just BS. Well, he's the first man to die in Virginia from coronavirus, um, or the first evangelical, let's say, to die of coronavirus. So I guess he didn't quite get it right, maybe. Um, James says, do we have to publish a Jungian essay to get into the advanced reading group? No. All you have to do is send me an email to skip.conover@gmail.com, and I will put you in it. There is an understanding, and it's a matter of honor, but not, there's no enforcement, but there's an understanding that you will send me $10 a month to participate. That $10 a month basically helps me defray some of the expenses of what I do here. Um, but it's not a very large amount, considering I'm offering a graduate level course in Jungian psychology. Um, and yes, I do know what that means because I have taught in the graduate level. Um, and David says, I had an experience where I had in my mind that the devil wanted my soul, and I was screaming, no, no, no. What do you think about my experience? I'm looking online about New Age spirituality. Do you think that's the cause? Um, well, first of all, I had such an experience too. Um, and it was a waking vision. It was not a dream, and it was constellated when my daughter told me on her 22nd birthday, after she had been to uh, Kazan, Tatarstan, believe it or not, and on a U.S.C scholarship. And she came back from that, and on her 22nd birthday, I took her out to dinner, and um, we had a lovely evening, 3 hours talking about all of our experiences in Japan and traveling around the world together and all sorts of things, and her experience in Russia. And at the end of the evening, and she had fallen into cahoots with some evangelical Christian missionaries. Okay. So she comes back to the States and gets into a Baptist church, I think, in Capitol Hill. And so at the end of that evening, the last thing she says to me, the very last thing, is, well, Dad, I'm sorry to say this to you, but I think you're going to hell. And I said, huh? And she left. Okay, so that set my mind whirling. And on my drive back from Washington to Annapolis, where I live, Mephistopheles himself plopped down in the seat next to me. And I cut the Faustian bargain. And the Faustian bargain was that he can have my immortal soul on my death, on condition that none of my daughters ever think that about me for the rest of my life. And he disappeared, and that was the end of it. But those visions and dreams are real, absolutely real. It happened to me in 1998 or 1999 on February the 22nd, 1999. It was her 22nd birthday. And I'm sure that these fire and brimstone sermons that you hear from evangelical pastors have been constellating that kind of dreams and visions for 2,000 years, probably, or at least 1,500 years, let's say. Maybe they didn't get into it until the 6th century, who knows? But in any case, they're real, and that vision of the devil is real. That's how the psyche works. And so you had an experience with consummate evil in your psyche, and that devil did want your soul, and that's exactly what he wanted. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. James says, so pleroma is metaphysics for before the Big Bang or before first creation. Yeah, arguably, I would say that's true. James says, Dad, you're going to hell. Haha, that sounds teenage angst there. Hate to hear it. Lord bless you, Skip. Well, my reaction is, and I was literally beside myself with fury when that happened to me. And I said to myself, who teaches a child to say such a thing to a parent? That's really beyond the pale. That's really just unacceptable. And it took me 10 years. I was furious with Christianity itself because of that experience. And, because in one sense, okay, I was a rationalist, a really straight arrow rationalist, a U.S. Marine, a lawyer, MBA. I built a company in Japan. I'd done all kinds of things. And so I say, there's no God up there. There's no hell down there. What the hell are these people doing, saying? What do they mean? And and then Nietzsche came along and said God is dead. Well, for people like me at that time, yes, that was true. But what happened to me was that I was so upset by that experience that it drove me into Dr. Jung's work. And sometime shortly after that, I saw the video of Dr. Jung where he's asked, do you believe in God? And he said, I have no need to believe, I know. And when I saw him say that, I said, aha, I know. Okay, I know. But what is it that I know? And it took me 10 years to answer that question and a lot of reading. And finally, I got to the answer in Answer to Job, which I have read in the regular YouTube channel, so you can hear me read the entire thing. But the answer is in paragraph 752 of Answer to Job. And the answer is this. It does not matter at all that a physically impossible fact is asserted, because all religious assertions are physical impossibilities. If they were not so, they would, as I said earlier, necessarily be treated in the textbooks of natural science. But religious statements, without exception, have to do with the reality of the psyche and not with the reality of the physis, the physical world. That's what the physis is. And so that one statement really pulled it all together for me because, you know, many of us have been brought up in some religious tradition, whatever it is, and you know, they're basically these days they're basically snake oil salesmen because they're selling you some sort of magical vision that no rationalist can accept. But the point is that what they're talking about is something that's in the psyche, it's not in the physical world. So when they say the Bible is 100% true, I say yes, it is. And some of it is true because it's a history of a people in the Middle East 2,000 years ago, and you know that's all well and good, but the miraculous aspects of it, the visionary, the numinous experiences that are in it, like Nebuchadnezzar seeing the handwriting on the wall, all of those are dreams or visions. And they explicitly say so in the Bible. But the way, at least a Christian pastor, a Reformed pastor sells it is, oh, this was God who is up here, who's writing on the wall. And that's not what it was at all. And that's not what it says in the Bible either. The Bible does say it the correct way, that it was a dream or a vision. And, but nobody notices, nobody pays attention to the fact that it was a dream or vision. And, uh, and so we think what they're talking about is somebody out there, some kindly Geppetto who's pulling our strings and is going to make us make the big touchdown or whatever it is. But um, but that's not true at all. I mean, the football player who points at heaven or the heavens um, when he makes a touchdown, he's pointing in the wrong direction, very simply, because the God that got him to make that touchdown is here. It's in his heart. And if he hadn't put in the time at the gym and had God pushing him, the God image, the self, pushing him to do all the exercises that he needed to do and to toughen himself up, he never would have made that touchdown. So yes, God helped him make that touchdown. There's no doubt about it. But it wasn't a God who was pulling his strings to make that happen in the moment. It was a God who pushed him for the last decade to toughen up so he could be a football player. That's what it was. Um, and you know, and so we have to just completely rethink all religious doctrine because they created dogma at a time when they had no clue what they were doing. Okay, we're talking about early Iron Age men who had no clue what they were talking about, and so they came up with a bunch of stories that describes the major transformations that human beings go through in a lifetime, to their credit, because those stories came from within themselves and they were right. But now they have to all be rewritten in, um, to satisfy the categories of modern understanding. That very simply. Okay, that's my homily. But anyway, let's see what else. Uh, so Oleg says, devil is the archetype of ego. Um, I'm not going to accept that exactly. Um, yes and no. Um, if sometimes they say the devil is the master of the subliminary world or subliminary world, which is our world, everything that's physical. So the devil is in charge here. Well, no, he's not. Okay, no, he isn't, because um, as as Jesus said in 1 John 4:1, you have to examine the future, or you have to examine the spirits to decide whether they be of God or not. And so the spirits that are coming through us are two streams. One is God and one is the devil. And the point of building up a strong ego is so that you can make the distinction between God and the devil. And um, Dr. Jung pointed to that verse many times in his career. Um, and what we have today, all the good things that we have in our lives, and anybody that's watching this has a computer or an iPhone or smartphone or an iPad, and so you're living a pretty good life compared to most people, um, and uh, and so you didn't get that good life because the devil was in charge. You got that good life because God was in charge. God being the good side of God. That's men and women who build up a strong enough ego to decide between good and bad, good and evil. And so I guess that answers that question from my point of view. I'm not saying you're wrong. That may work for you. So let's see where I am here. David says, and how you interpret this thing. Sometimes I go back with fear and I do not know how to interpret even the good experiences. How do you look at them? Well, in the first chapter of this book, the Red Book by C.G. Jung, Reader's Edition, which you can find on page 126. The very last paragraph of it says, the one eye of the Godhead is blind, the one ear of the Godhead is deaf. The order of its being is crossed by chaos. So be patient with the crippledness of the world and do not overvalue its consummate beauty. Okay, so all human beings have been selecting beauty over ugliness since time immemorial. But the universe is in balance. What he means by that, do not overvalue its consummate beauty. We've been deciding, making good, bad decisions in everything that we do for the last 3.5 billion years. Okay. And so if you look out at the world, well, you can think of the comment in Downton Abbey movie where someone says, well, Downton Abbey is like a swan. Everything upstairs is quite beautiful, but downstairs there's a lot of work going on. Well, okay, there's a lot of ugliness in life, in human life, in everything that happens to it. We're problem-solving creatures. We do nothing but solve problems all day long, every day, day in and day out, from the beginning of our lives to the end. And in that problem-solving capacity, we're hopefully always deciding on the good side, what is good, and um, and we see it manifest. I mean, it manifests in something like the Cathedral of Notre Dame, which manifested over 100 years, 700 years ago, and um, and then it burned. And when it burned, some of you probably remember that I wept. I was a complete mess, and uh, I didn't know why, because I'm not Catholic. But the reason is that I thought something had been lost, and I was wrong, that nothing has been lost by the burning of Notre Dame. It will be rebuilt, whether it takes 5 years or 100 years. Um, Notre Dame represents something in the human spirit, and so yes, there were a few artifacts that were lost, and they're irreplaceable, and that's a sad tale. Um, but now, the good news about that, the flip side is that that now artisans all over the world will have the opportunity to make new things that will be even more beautiful, informed by modern techniques of art. and 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 so that's a very good thing. And so there will be consummate beauty in Notre Dame once again. And so when there is consummate beauty, we have to understand that, it's a balancing from something that might be very ugly, like the burning of the cathedral. And if when you go to the grocery store, okay, there's all this good meat and stuff. That's great stuff. But, all life lives on other life. Literally, that's the answer. And so everything that's in the grocery store that supports your life right now, today, everything that you purchase and eat was once alive. Okay. And somebody has killed it on your behalf, even if you haven't. And so, um, life's consummate beauty has its ugly side also. And so, that's the sort of thing that we have to think about. Um, James says, I ended up in a psych ward for a bit, schizoid typed, completely delusional, and after leaving found Jung, and he seems to have the most depth and sincerity to his psychology work. Absolutely. And, he had an experience probably in many ways like yours, and so did I. But he explained it like this to James Joyce. James Joyce came to Jung with his schizophrenic daughter, and he couldn't understand what was going on. And Jung explained to him quite simply that she's drowning in the sea that you swim in. And so the point is, the world is in chaos. We have crazy things happening all the time. I mean, the coronavirus is not the first time that there's been chaos in the world, and horrific death, right? And so what we all need to do in our lives is learn to swim in that chaos. And it's a big task for 21st century people, because in the 16th century, the average person only got as much information in their lifetime as is in one edition of the Sunday New York Times. So just think about that. Next Sunday, go to your grocery store and pick up a copy of the New York Times. And you are holding in your hand as much information as any person in the 16th century had in their lifetime. That's what you're doing. And comparing that to us now on the fact that we have all of the world's information at our fingertips, all of it, that's quite a difference. It's quite a stretch that we've had to do over 500 years now, and so we're all living in this sea of chaos. I always think of the Navy hymn, the lyrics of it. Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arm doth bind the restless wave, who bids the mighty ocean deep its own specific limits keep. Oh, hear us when we cry to thee for those in peril on the sea. Well, you can see why that is the Navy hymn, because of its reference to the sea, but that sea is also the sea of chaos that we all live in. And we have to pray as a petition to God, as God exists within each of us and exists in our collective, that we will all be able to continue to swim on that sea. And I was saying to a friend this morning that a great metaphor for this is there's a story, there was a documentary a few years back of a U.S. Navy sailor who was out on a catwalk on the USS America, which is an aircraft carrier, during a midnight watch one night in a storm, and a wave came along and washed him off the ship. So 1 minute he was on the ship, and the next minute he was watching its lights go over the horizon. And he was alone in the Sea of Oman. He didn't have a life jacket, and he survived for 36 hours, I think, just by following the procedure that we've all learned in swimming, where you take your trousers off and get air in your trousers, and then you can hold on to that and it'll help keep you buoyant. And he did that for 36 hours. And after 36 hours, a couple of Pakistani fishermen on a fishing scow out of a fishing village in Pakistan picked him up. Just happened to run into him in the Sea of Oman, and they brought him aboard. But if I recall correctly, they didn't have a radio, and the Navy reported this young man as lost at sea and gave him a nice funeral. And I can't remember whether it was 1 month or 4 months later, this fishing boat went back to its fishing village, and the young man was able to call his home. But he was fully individuated at that time, you can be sure of it. And that's the way we all are. We're all just lost at sea, and we have to hope that there's a Pakistani fishing boat to pick us up when we're in trouble. And metaphorically, that's what happened to that young man. And so those of us who can navigate the sea have to help those who are having difficulty with it. And so that's then going back to the Jung James Joyce story. So Jung told Joyce, she's drowning in the sea in which you're floating or swimming, and so someone who's going through a schizophrenic attack. I'm not a mental health professional, so I'm just talking out of school here, but um, my sense from reading some of Jung's experiences and having my own experiences is that um, you have an occasion when you get lost in the chaos, and you have to find your footing again, and that's what um, some experienced people can help you do. And this is because we're having this big psychic epidemic that's just beginning with the coronavirus. I'll mention that some of us are putting together a website to give access to us. So I'll put a link to that, um, which is, it's called wisdompath.team. And I've only begun to put that together since last Saturday, I think. But, it happens because I have a lot of advanced reading group members, and about 80 of them actually, although I usually get about 10 to 12 in the weekly seminar live, but the rest of them monitor it and watch the videos in playback for various reasons, because we meet at 1:30 in the afternoon, for example, in the U.S. A lot of people can't do it at that time. But the point about the Wisdom Path team is we're putting together a group of individuals who are available to talk to, where someone is not at the point of a really bad break, a mental break, but someone who might be anxious or depressed or something like that. Sometimes we can talk to you and help you out. And so we're happy to do that. And uh, at the moment, what we're trying to do is make that the cost of it pretty low for most of us. I mean, there's one or two who are charging $50 an hour. But for example, Tim Holmes and I, who are the founders of this page, are charging $10 an hour, which is quite a bit better than you can get from a Jungian analyst. But of course, we're not offering mental health service. What we're offering is somebody to talk to about some of the things that are happening to you. So I hope that's helpful, James. So Oleg says, in the eyes of rationalists, we Jungians looks like some kind of flat earthers. They think that we're crazy and don't read smart books, but I was the rationalist before and I saw crazy things. Well, there are plenty of crazy things because, that's what all Christian dogma is in a way. I mean, okay, you lay down tracks. Look, we need rationality. We need logos. Everything that's in your room, everything that you're looking at in my image right now comes to you because of rationality and logos, okay? You have to have rationality to make anything, to make this the computer that you're looking at, actually, to make all these books, or my printer, or the light behind me, or even the bookcase, or the koto in the corner. Every physical thing that you can see in your room was made by logos being 100% perfect. So we need logos. But none of that is alive, okay? Even the image of me that's on your device right now is not alive. You touch it, it's not a physical person. Okay, I'm alive, but I don't have anybody in the room with me here. And so the point is that life is in the chaos. Okay, that's eros. We live in the chaos. And what we do from the time we're a wild animal when we're born until we're mature is we learn how to basically survive in that chaos. And we have a varying amount of time from maybe 8 years to 21 years before we have to reach full maturity, depending on where we live in the world. Um, but we're still learning until we're 35 or 40. That's why Dr. Jung wasn't even interested in people under 35, because he was interested in the people who had become mature human beings. And you get to a point where you realize, all those rules that I learned, people break those rules. My goodness. How can I live in a world where people break the rules? They break the rules all the time. Okay, that's what happens. And what you have to learn is when you want to be supporting rules and when you don't. And you have to make, that goes back to 1 John 4:1. You have to decide which rules are of God and which rules aren't. And, that's a serious question. And, okay, I sort of lost my train of thought then, but I hope that helped. So anyway, there are a lot of crazy things in the world, and we have to have the discernment to see what's crazy and what's not, and make the right choice. And I don't have your answer. You have your answer. Um, and going elsewhere says, in the Bible, some teachings missing parts of the original. Yeah, probably. James, also gnosis-wise, I've telepathically communicated with an angel once. I have no doubt about that. Okay, that I wouldn't dispute that fact for a moment, James. Um, what I would say to you is that that's a psychic fact uh, for you, and and you need to be evaluating for yourself what that experience means. Okay, I can't tell you what it means. I'm not a mental health professional, and I'm not going to try, but that's what you need to do. Oleg says Jung was friend and even teacher for a lot of smart, intellectual, and rational people. Wolfgang Pauli, Nobel Prize for quantum physics, was a fan and student of Jung. He sure was, and the book Psychology and Alchemy, which I happen to have right here. I'll show you how much of it is devoted to Wolfgang Pauli. Well, okay, it's about this much, okay, because over a 10-year period, Dr. Jung interpreted about 1,000 dreams of Wolfgang Pauli's. And what they do is they symbolize Pauli's individuation process. And so if you read that section of Psychology and Alchemy and know that those dreams are Wolfgang Pauli's dreams, and you read what Jung has to say about them, you'll learn a hell of a lot more than you could learn watching a video of mine. But anyway, anyway, at some point here, Thomas Arst, who is the instigator of this series. Okay, there's a series of now 4 volumes of Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arst. Thomas Arst is a physicist, and he is German. He lives in the Black Forest, and he has promised me that he would do a session for our advanced reading group on the Pauli-Jung exchange, which he which he's been studying for 20 years. So he's quite an expert on it, and I look forward to the time when we can do that. Thomas has been very busy lately because he's also executive director of the Durkheim Center in Germany, which is a mental health retreat. He's the executive director of it, and anybody that has an operation like that right now is just up to their eyeballs in things. Thomas invited me to the Eranos conference this year, and that's this story. Here's the story of it. Thomas made me read it. Eranos, an Alternative Intellectual History of the 20th Century. It's an excellent book, and very worthwhile to read. But Thomas had invited me to the Eranos conference, and the Eranos conference, for those of you who don't know, was a gathering of intellectuals starting in 1933, founded by C.G. Jung and Olga Freeby-Kapteyn. And it was actually Olga's life work to pull these conferences together. But Joseph Campbell edited 6 books like this, okay, of the essays and lectures that these people gave one another at the Eranos conference. And so that's also very, very good stuff. Okay, let's see. Oh, so anyway, the point is, Thomas invited me to this year's Eranos conference, which would have been going on 1 month from today, but it's been canceled due to the coronavirus. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do that maybe next year, maybe not, because I'm personally quarantined until there's a vaccine. But anyway, Thomas has agreed to come on our advanced reading group seminar and discuss the Jung and Pauli exchange. They wrote letters back and forth for like 30 years. And so, let's see. So, Going Elsewhere wants to recommend Zimbardo TED Talk on Evil. I can't make a comment one way or the other. James says devil equals trickster, pride, vanity, temporal, as opposed to eternal, ruler of material kingdoms. Well, the devil is certainly a trickster, but Mercurius was also a trickster, and Mercurius was the guy that brought things up from the unconscious. And so he wasn't, he might have brought up some devilish things, but he wasn't the devil. Let's put it that way. He's the spirit who brings things from the unconscious. And that's in Greek. In Greek god terms, that's Mercury or Hermes. Hermes is Mercurius. So David says, "What is the third eye according to the Bible?" Uh, I have no idea, David. I am not a theologian. I Yeah, and Oleg says it's probably the intuition. That may well be. I mean, there's, the eye appears in all kinds of different art and so on. And it appears on the American $1 bill, at least over the Washington Monument. So, um, so the eye of God, the all-seeing eye of God, is all-seeing, but as Dr. Jung pointed out, the one eye of God is blind. So um, let's see. Alex says, Lucia Anna Joyce was a patient of Jung. Interesting, yes. James, personally, I've been seeking family, government, friend, myth, help, which has been a boon compared to previous nihilisms. Yes, because um, we there's some of us who know a few things that can help. Um, and, in my opinion, a lot of us can heal ourselves if we have the information that Dr. Jung provided. And, Dr. Jung has always been my shrink, and, I've never had to actually see a mental health professional, but it doesn't mean that I haven't had dreams and visions. I surely have. And so Dr. Jung, wouldn't have been accepted or wasn't accepted, couldn't have been accepted, and he knew it, by theologians and the Freudian psychologists of his day, who were all materialists and rationalists. And even today, that school of psychotherapy hasn't changed. I mean, it still, does things by the rational method. And so if you come in and you have this or that symptom, they're going to give you a pill and say, slam bam, thank you. Um, Here's your bill. And, and Dr. Jung, Jungian analysts would not, in my opinion, tend to want you to take any sort of drug to have a numinous experience. We all have them anyway. We just don't recognize them. David says, "What would I say to you? What would you say to you at 22 years old?" Well, I couldn't listen probably at that age. I was a second lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps when I was 22. And my best friend at the time was killed in Vietnam when I was 22. He was my roommate at the basic school. And, so I had nothing but rage and fury in me at that time. And, a Marine officer, U.S. Marine, the U.S. Marine Corps is a weapon. And every Marine is a weapon. We're a weapon that belongs to the President of the United States. And it's a very effective, efficient weapon. But it is all logos. It's all rules. And we're trained to be that weapon, and it has its uses. That's what I would say. And so there was, if anybody had tried to talk to me about Jungian type ideas at that time, I might have been somewhat receptive because I had my doubts about Christianity even in those days, as it's presented in the United States. But um, I was all about preparing myself to go to Vietnam, and I wanted to be the best, most effective, um, U.S. Marine officer I could be. And so that wasn't my job when I was 22. Um, but it became more and more my job to understand these things as I went along. And they happen because you experience trauma. Okay. And I've experienced many traumas in my lifetime. I would urge you to read this book, Trauma and the Soul by Donald Kalshin. And it's very helpful to give you a perspective on traumatic events in your life. Um, and there are videos uh, on YouTube by Donald Kalshin where he talks about his book. So I'll write his name in the chat here. He's a Jungian analyst in Tucson, I believe, um, but we all face trauma one way or another, and we face it right from the moment we're born. It's very traumatic to fall out of heaven, to fall out of the pleroma, so to speak, and into a life. Um, and and so once you're in a life, then you have to solve problems for the rest of your life. And so even an infant, a newborn infant, is solving the problem of hunger and comfort. And that's why the infant cries for his mother, and mother knows what to do. But that's actually a problem-solving activity. Um, and we're solving problems every day. I solve 100 problems a day, um, at least, probably more than that. So Oleg says, I am really wonder what Jung thought about postmodern in art. Jordan Peterson says that postmodern is only evil, but now I am not so sure cultural Marxism is evil. Sure, but what Jung thought. Well, Jung thought that Jung had probably attended the Armory show in 1909 in New York City, or 1912. I forget which trip he did that. It might have been 1912. But anyway, he saw modern art at that time, and for him, it it was very shocking. He was coming out of uh, straight-laced, all buttoned-down Victorian Europe. He was born in 1875, and so seeing the first Kandinskys and things like that um, was totally shocking to him. Um, and he regarded it as dissociation because he had been working in a mental health institution, the Bergholzli in Zurich, and so he came at it as a psychiatrist, thinking, "Oh wow, these people are dissociated; they're crazy," and actually they weren't. And I think he mellowed on that perspective. I mean, you have to understand where the man was coming from. And I don't know if I can pull it up. I'll just see if I can find a document here. I have a photograph of a painting that was done um, by Picasso. Maybe I do have it. Let's just see. Um, yes, I do have it. I can share it. Here it is. Okay, so this is a painting that was done by Picasso, and it's unlike most paintings that you ever saw done by Picasso. And Picasso's father was an artist, and so he taught um, he taught his son to paint. And so Picasso made a comment once that at the age of 12, this painting is called First Communion, by the way, and it's quite lovely. But he said, at the age of 12, I could paint like Goya. Uh, and it was only after that that I could learn to paint like Picasso. And so um, I'll stop that share and see if I can share how he painted like Picasso. Um, This is his portrait of Francoise Gillot, who was one of the 7 women in his life. So this is his portrait of her. Uh, and so, this is the way he saw her. Um, and it's symbolic. And I think at the end of his life, Dr. Jung understood he was symbolic. And he actually wrote an essay on it, which we have discussed in the advanced reading group. So if you join the advanced reading group, you'll be able to find our um, couple sessions that we did on Picasso. Um, so, you know, Jung's view of postmodern art um, and modern art and postmodern art um, evolved over time, as mine did as well. Because, when I was in my rationalistic way, I never had teared up at a museum. Okay, some people go through museums and they literally have tears running down their eyes, and that had never been me. But one time I was at the Boston Museum of Art, and I was at a modern art exhibition, and I walked into a room that had a Jackson Pollock, a drip painting, and I immediately began to sob, and I couldn't control it for about 10 minutes. And I had no idea why. Okay, because here's this drip painting. And as a rationalist, I'd always said, well, yeah, a kindergartner could have done that. Why do people put this on the wall type stuff? I mean, that was kind of my attitude. But that day changed that because I literally couldn't stop sobbing for about 10 minutes. And it was shocking. And I didn't figure it out for 20 years. And I figured it out on video. You can find it in the Numinous Experiences playlist on this YouTube channel. Um, I was telling the story of that one evening in the Monday night session, and one of my friends that's in that group just said 2 words. He said olive drab, and instantly it connected up the death of my roommate from 1969. He died on April the 11th, 1969. And so, and my sobbing experience had been in about 1995. So there's 20 years that I knew, I kept remembering that I'd had that experience, but I didn't know why. And in that instant, um, Bill pulled it all together for me. And, you know, again, you can see it happen. I'm having a numinous experience right on the video, and I begin to weep, and um, it was very powerful. Um, so, people's attitudes change, and so I wouldn't say that Jung's attitude was the same throughout his life, not at all. Um, and James says Jung was a brave man. Oh, yes. uh, and he knew what he could get away with and what he couldn't get away with. And so there's just so much to that story. Jung was like some kind of archaeologist. Yes, nobody believed in dinosaurs, but Jung brings giant bones from the ground and said, look, they are real. Yeah, that's about it. Terence McKenna called Jung an ontological archaeologist who had horsehair brush and nitpick. Yep, something like that, or nutpick, right? That's pretty abstract, but yes. So Jung saw postmodern as the next step of evolution. Um, yeah, I think he did, because um, in the end, he said, the thing that's going to save the world. Um, let's put it this way. Edward Edinger said, we're either going to all become one thing ultimately, or we're going to be destroyed and extinct. Okay, that's stark. And what Jung said was that it's the Western democracies that will save the world. And the reason he said that is because we in the United States and in many Western countries are able to adjust in small ways, um, without having things get way out of whack. For the most part, I mean, when the United States had its Civil War, that was an eruption. That was where that was not successful. But where the United States is successful is that we have Americans of every race, religion, culture, language, etc., who are Americans. They're legally Americans. And this has been going on since the very, very beginning. If you want to read about that, you can read Island at the Center of the World, which is about the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam, in which some of my ancestors figure. Um, but even in that Dutch colony in the 17th century, early 17th century, um, there were Jews, there were Muslims, there were free blacks at that time also. And so it was already a picture of what Americans are today. And so the point is that we've been clashing together in all these different ways for 400 years. And in the end, it has produced the strongest country in the world. It, some of us might say it's the best country. Maybe uh, we would have a hard time justifying that today. but um, but there's no doubt that it's the strongest country in the world, and that everyone outside of the United States does look to the President of the United States to provide leadership on things like coronavirus, etc. And when he fails to provide leadership, then that's a big problem for everybody around the world. Um, but the point is that It's our diversity that has made us strong. Why? Because it's a process like tempering steel. And so when you temper steel, you're forcing the impurities out of the steel. A Japanese katana, for example, is the best steel there is, and it was made by hand. And that steel has been pounded at least 900 times in a forge. And so every impurity has been removed from the steel of a Japanese sword. Um, well, the culture of the United States is like that. I mean, the people on television, the different channels want us to be debating and angry with one another. But, you know, if you turn off the television and go to the grocery store, you know, we largely have a very good life in the country, and we get along very well, regardless of race, religion, or um, culture, what have you. And, you know, and it works. It works. And so Dr. Jung knew that, and knew that it it's that kind of a process that is necessary to prevent human beings from destroying ourselves. And you see with what happens in countries where you end up with one-sided attitudes, like Germany before the war, the Japanese before the war, um, and you know, you can point to Turkey or Egypt today as examples of countries that are ruled autocratically. And, you know, we just leave those countries behind. I mean, not terribly behind, but, you know, there's no question that the United States is stronger than those countries. And that's the way it works. And so that's what postmodernism is about, because the modern era was an era in which we still recognize borders and so on. And of course, when the EU became the EU, um, you know, it really became a federated republic like the United States, except they haven't admitted it. So, you know, like in the United States, okay, there are a lot of Irish that live in the Boston area, and one of them is my son-in-law. Um, and so that's like a little country. But, you know, the truth is that there are 10 times as many people of Irish descent in the United States as there are in Ireland today. We have about 40 million Irish Americans, and in the Republic of Ireland, there's about 4 million. And so, um, so we have all those issues, but they have all intermixed with us. I have one son-in-law who was born in Korea. He's a Korean American, and so I have 3 Korean American grandchildren, and I have 3 Irish American grandchildren. But they're all Americans, and when you talk to them, if you talk to them on the telephone, you wouldn't know them as any different from what I am, and that's an American. Okay, first, last, and foremost. So anyway, um, so yes, so look, I was answering your question about the next step of evolution, and that's the way it works. Um, it was not leftist, and he was not conservative, right? Jung was on the middle, just like Lao Tzu. Well, Jung called himself extremely conservative, but um, he didn't think of that in a political way. Let's put it that way, because he was a doctor of the soul, a psychiatrist, and he couldn't be a medical professional and make politics an issue. I mean, it's like when I go to the Jewish doctor that replaced my ankle, he doesn't ask me what religion I am. He asked me if I have a broken ankle, which I did. And so we have to think about things in the right way. But anyway, okay, I'm going to terminate. I'm past my time with my wife, and so I will be back tomorrow to read on in, which book am I reading here? The Bible and the Psyche. That's what this has been about. And so tomorrow is going to be an interesting one because it's the emergence of the feminine. And I'll look forward to seeing you there. I'll be here at 4:30ish to start that tomorrow. Thank you for joining me today.